Welcome, beloved, to the Goodnight Gospel, where we rest our minds and hearts in the Word of God before we sleep. Tonight, we turn to one of the most powerful and cautionary tales in Scripture, the story of Samson. Samson was a man of incredible strength, yet deep weakness, a man chosen from birth, set apart as a Nazirite, empowered by the Spirit of God, yet also a man whose passions often led him astray. His story is one of triumph and tragedy, of compromise and redemption. As we listen tonight, may we see not just the man Samson, but the God who worked through him, the God who delivers his people, who shows mercy even in failure, and who brings victory through broken vessels. So breathe deeply, rest quietly, and let the story of Samson draw you into reflection and peace. The time was dark. In Judges chapter 13, verse 1, we read, "The children of Israel again did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, and Yahweh delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. Israel had forgotten God once more. They had turned to idols, turned to sin, turned away from the one who had rescued them so many times. And as always, their disobedience carried consequences. For 40 years, a full generation, they were under the heavy hand of the Philistines. The Philistines were a coastal people, fierce warriors with advanced weapons and chariots. They lived in fortified cities and controlled trade routes. To Israel, they were a constant threat. Oppressors who taxed them, mocked them, and subdued them. The people longed for deliverance. They remembered the stories of Moses, Joshua, and Gideon. They remembered the victories of the past. But now they groaned under the weight of defeat. In the midst of this oppression, in a small town named Zorah, lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were simple people, Israelites of the tribe of Dan. But their home was marked by sorrow. Manoah's wife was barren. Year after year they hoped, year after year they prayed, but no child came. In a culture where children were seen as a blessing and a legacy, barrenness carried deep pain and shame. Yet in the silence of their womb, God was preparing something greater than she could imagine. Judges chapter 13, verse 3 says, "Yahweh's angel appeared to the woman and said to her, 'See now, you are barren and childless, but you shall conceive and bear a son.'" Imagine her shock. One moment she was alone in her daily work, perhaps gathering water, perhaps grinding grain. The next, the presence of heaven stood before her. The angel of the Lord, radiant, commanding, holy. His words pierced through years of sorrow. "You shall conceive and bear a son." This was not just comfort, it was a promise. The angel continued in verses 4 and 5. "Now therefore beware, please, and don't drink wine or strong drink, and don't eat any unclean thing. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come on his head. For the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb. He shall begin to save Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. This son would be unlike any other, set apart from birth as a Nazirite." The Nazirite vow was a sacred dedication. No wine, no unclean food, no cutting of hair. A visible sign of consecration to God. His whole life would be a living reminder that he belonged not to himself, but to the Lord. And his mission: he shall begin to save Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. The word "begin" is important. Samson would not complete Israel's deliverance. That would come later through others, and ultimately through Christ. but he would begin it. His life would spark resistance. His strength would remind Israel that God still delivered. The woman ran to tell her husband. Her words tumbled out. The angel, the promise, the instructions. Manoah listened, astonished. He prayed, "O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us, and teach us what we shall do to the child who shall be born." Judges 13:8. God heard. The angel returned, again appearing to the woman. She quickly fetched Manoah, and together they stood before the messenger of heaven. Manoah, overwhelmed, asked questions. What shall be the child's way of life? What is his mission? And again, the angel repeated. The child was to be a Nazirite, set apart, dedicated to God from the womb. Manoah, not yet realizing this was the angel of the Lord, offered to prepare food. But the angel said, "If you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to Yahweh." So Manoah took a young goat and placed it on the rock with a grain offering. As the flame rose, something astounding happened. Judges chapter 13 verse 20 says, "For when the flame went up toward the sky from off the altar, Yahweh's angel ascended in the flame of the altar. Manoah and his wife watched, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel disappeared into the flame, rising heavenward. Awe gripped them. Manoah cried out, 'We shall surely die because we have seen God.' But his wife, steady in faith, replied, 'If Yahweh were pleased to kill us, he wouldn't have received a burnt offering and a meal offering at our hand. And he wouldn't have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things at this time.' Her faith steadied her husband. Her womb would soon bear the promised child. The promise was given. The angel had ascended in fire. Manoah and his wife, trembling yet filled with hope, awaited the child. Soon, the one who would begin to save Israel would be born. His name would be Samson. His life would be unlike any other. Judges chapter 13 verse 24 says, "The woman bore a son and called his name Samson. The child grew, and Yahweh blessed him. The promise had become flesh. The barren woman who had once carried sorrow now cradled joy in her arms. The baby's first cries filled their home with hope. They named him Samson, little sun or sun-like, a name of brightness, light, and strength. A fitting name for one who would shine in a dark time, who would blaze with power against Israel's oppressors. For Manoah and his wife, every smile, every laugh, every cry reminded them this child was a gift from God. Samson was not just any child. He was consecrated as a Nazirite, not by his own choice, not by his parents' vow, but by God's command. The Nazirite vow meant three things: no wine or strong drink, a symbol of separation from worldly indulgence; no touching dead bodies, a call to purity and avoidance of defilement; no razor on his head, his uncut hair a visible sign of consecration to God. These were outward symbols of an inward calling. His very life was a declaration. This man belongs to God. Every time his hair grew longer, it reminded all who saw him that he was set apart. Every time he abstained from wine or touched nothing unclean, his parents whispered to him, "You are dedicated to Yahweh." Imagine Manoah and his wife raising this child. They had been visited by an angel. They had seen fire carry him heavenward. They knew this boy was no ordinary son. Every meal, every teaching, every correction carried weight. They told him the story of his birth again and again. They reminded him, "Samson, your life has a purpose. You are chosen. You are set apart. You are the Lord's." Parenting a chosen child was both joy and burden. Joy because God had entrusted them with his plan. Burden because they bore the responsibility of nurturing him in holiness. Judges chapter 13 verse 25 says, Yahweh's spirit began to move him in Mahane Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Even as a youth, Samson felt the stirring of the Spirit. Perhaps it came as sudden bursts of strength or a restless energy in his heart. Perhaps it came in moments of boldness, a sense of calling, a power greater than himself. The Spirit of the Lord was preparing him, shaping him, drawing him toward the destiny announced before his birth. Samson's consecration shows us something profound. God's call on a life begins before birth. He chose Samson in the womb. He set him apart before his first cry. This is the same God who told Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you." Jeremiah 1:5. Samson's story reminds us, your life is not random. God knows you. He forms you. He calls you with purpose. Pause here. Imagine Samson's parents holding him, telling him of the angel's promise. Imagine them combing his growing hair, reminding him, "This is your sign. You are consecrated. You are set apart." And now imagine God saying the same to you. You are chosen. You are mine. I have called you for a purpose. Take a deep breath. Inhale calling. Exhale aimlessness. Whisper, "Lord, I am yours. Set me apart for your will." Samson grew strong, his hair long, his spirit stirred. The Philistines still oppressed Israel, but hope had begun to rise. A deliverer was maturing in their midst. Soon, his strength would shock his enemies. Soon, his passion would both empower and endanger him. The story of Samson was only beginning. Judges chapter 14 verse 1 begins. Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. As a young man, Samson's passions began to reveal themselves. Strong in body, bold in spirit, he also carried a weakness, his eyes. He saw the woman of Timnah, and he desired her. Timnah was a Philistine town. To marry there was to step outside the covenant boundaries God had set for Israel. His parents, faithful Danites, knew this. When Samson returned home, he declared to his father and mother, "I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as my wife." His parents were troubled. Verse 3 records their protest. "Isn't there a woman among your brother's daughters, or among all my people, that you go to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines?" They wanted him to marry within Israel, to honor his calling as a Nazirite, to remain distinct from their oppressors. But Samson insisted, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." It seemed like rebellion. Yet verse 4 reveals a mystery. But his father and mother didn't know that it was of Yahweh, for he sought an occasion against the Philistines. Even Samson's flawed desires would become a tool in God's hand. His longing for this Philistine woman would spark the conflict through which God would begin to deliver Israel. On the road to Timnah, something happened that revealed Samson's extraordinary strength. Judges chapter 14 verse 5 says, "Then Samson went down with his father and his mother to Timnah and came to the vineyards of Timnah. and behold, a young lion roared against him. Imagine the scene. The vineyard paths, the sudden roar, the flash of teeth and muscle as a lion lunged. His parents perhaps a little behind, unaware. Samson, alone, facing a predator. Verse 6, Yahweh's spirit came mightily on him, and he tore him as he would have torn a young goat, and he had nothing in his hand. With his bare hands, empowered by the Spirit, Samson seized the lion. His muscles surged with supernatural might. The beast struggled, claws thrashing, jaws snapping, but Samson overpowered it. With a cry, he tore it apart, leaving its lifeless body on the path. He told no one. He kept the secret to himself. Later, when he returned to take the woman, he passed by the lion's carcass. To his surprise, bees had made a hive within it, and honey flowed. He scooped it up with his hands, tasting the sweetness from the carcass of death. He even gave some to his parents, though he told them nothing of its source. From this strange sight, Samson crafted a riddle. At the wedding feast, he posed it to 30 Philistine men. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Judges 14:14. The Philistines could not solve it. For days they puzzled. Their pride stung. At last they pressured Samson's bride to coax the answer from him. Weeping, pleading, she pressed him until he relented. She revealed it to her people, and they answered the riddle before the time expired. Samson's anger burned. Judges 14:19 says, Yahweh's spirit came mightily on him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and struck 30 men of them, and took their plunder, and gave their garments to those who had declared the riddle. With righteous fury, Samson struck 30 Philistines, claiming their garments to pay his debt. His power was not mere brute force. It was the Spirit of God, surging through him as an instrument of judgment. But his pride and passion also brought strife. His wife was given to another. His anger simmered. Samson's first battles had begun. His strength was undeniable. The Philistines had tasted his power, but this was only the beginning. Soon his exploits would shake their cities, humble their armies, and reveal both his might and his weakness. After Samson's riddle and rage, he left Timnah in fury. His bride was given to another man, in fact, to the best man of the feast. When Samson discovered this betrayal, his anger burned hot. But it was not only about his wounded pride. It became an opportunity for God's plan to unfold. Judges chapter 15 verse 3 records Samson's words. This time I will be blameless in the case of the Philistines, when I harmed them. Samson devised a plan unlike anything the Philistines had seen. Judges 15:4-5 says, Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned tail to tail, and put a torch in the middle between every 2 tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let them go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, and also the vineyards and olive groves. Imagine the chaos. 300 foxes, wild and frantic, tearing through fields with fire trailing behind them. Crops ignited, vineyards scorched, olive groves consumed in flames. The Philistines' food supply, their wealth, their pride, reduced to ash. It was devastating, and it was deliberate. The Philistines had taken his wife. Samson would take their harvest. The Philistines demanded to know who was responsible. When they heard it was Samson, whose wife had been given away, their rage boiled. In cruel retaliation, they burned the woman and her father with fire. Tragedy followed betrayal. Samson's vengeance had begun a cycle of violence that spiraled out of control. Judges 15:7-8 says, Samson said to them, "If you behave like this, surely I will be avenged of you, and after that I will stop." He struck them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and lived in the cave in the rock of Etam. Hip and thigh was an ancient expression for a ruthless, decisive victory. Samson struck the Philistines with sheer, overwhelming force. Their bodies lay scattered, their pride lay broken, and when his fury was spent, Samson withdrew, not to a palace, not to a camp, but to a cave in the rock of Etam. Alone again, set apart, a man of contradiction, feared yet isolated. But the Philistines would not let him rest. They marched into Judah, encamping near Lehi, demanding that Samson be handed over. The men of Judah, terrified of their oppressors, confronted Samson. Judges 15:11 says, Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" Notice their words. They had accepted defeat. They had embraced bondage. Rather than rise with Samson, they rebuked him for provoking the enemy. Fear had enslaved them more than chains ever could. The men of Judah said, "We have come down to bind you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines." Samson, remarkably, agreed. "Swear to me that you will not fall on me yourselves," he said. And they promised. They bound him with 2 new ropes and led him away. Their own deliverer betrayed into enemy hands. It is a foreshadowing. A chosen man, betrayed by his own people, handed over to Gentile oppressors. Samson's story here points forward to Christ. But Samson's story was not over. Judges 15:14-15 says, "When he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him. Then Yahweh's Spirit came mightily on him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that was burned with fire, and his bonds dropped from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand, and took it, and struck 1,000 men with it." Picture it, bound one moment, free the next. Surrounded by Philistine soldiers, their shouts of triumph cut short by his roar of defiance. His hands found a simple weapon, the jawbone of a donkey. Crude, unlikely, unimpressive. Yet in his grip, it became an instrument of destruction. With supernatural strength, Samson struck. One after another, Philistines fell. The battlefield was littered with bodies, 1,000 men defeated by one man with one bone. When it was done, Samson cried out in victory, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps on heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck 1,000 men." But victory was followed by weakness. Judges 15:18 says, "He was very thirsty and called on Yahweh and said, 'You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised.' The strong man became weak. His thirst was overwhelming, his body failing, and yet even here he prayed. For the first time in the story, Samson cried to God in dependence, and God answered. Verse 19 says, "God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out of it. When he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived." Samson's strength was not in his muscles, nor his hair, nor his rage. His true strength was always in God. Samson's victories show us the paradox of calling. God uses the weak to do mighty things, yet he also allows the mighty to taste weakness so they remember their dependence on him. Samson could slay 1,000 with a jawbone, yet nearly faint from thirst. His story reminds us, even the strongest among us must rely on God. Take a deep breath. Inhale dependence. Exhale pride. Whisper, Lord, my strength comes from you alone. Samson judged Israel for 20 years. His feats struck fear into the Philistines. His strength was legendary. Yet his weakness, his passions, his pride still lingered. And soon they would lead him into the arms of Delilah. Judges chapter 16 opens with Samson going to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute and went into her. Even after 20 years of judging Israel, his weakness still lingered. His strength was unmatched, yet his passions remained unchecked. Soon after, he met Delilah in the valley of Sorek. Her name means delicate, and she would prove to be the delicate thread that unraveled the mighty man of Israel. The Philistine lords saw an opportunity. They approached Delilah with promises of wealth. Entice him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Greed whispered louder than loyalty. Delilah agreed. Delilah began with sweet words. Please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound to afflict you. Samson, perhaps amused, perhaps arrogant, toyed with her. He said, If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that were never dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. The Philistines brought the bowstrings. She bound him as he slept. Then she shouted, The Philistines are upon you, Samson! He snapped the bowstrings as if they were threads near fire. His strength remained, his secret intact. Delilah pressed again. Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me how you may be bound. This time Samson replied, If they bind me with new ropes that were never used, then I shall become weak. Again she tried. Again she cried out. Again he broke the ropes like thread. Her lips smiled, but her heart hardened. She would not stop. She pressed further. Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. Samson said, If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web. She did so, pinning his hair with the loom. When she shouted, The Philistines are upon you! He awoke, pulled away the loom, and walked free. Delilah was relentless. Verse 16 says, When she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, his soul was troubled to death. Her persistence wore him down, day after day, word after word, smile after smile, pressure after pressure. Temptation often works this way, not always in sudden blows, but in persistent whispers, wearing us down, drawing us closer to compromise. At last, exhausted, Samson opened his heart. Verse 17 says, He told her all his heart and said to her, No razor has ever come on my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will go from me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. He revealed the secret, not his muscles, not his training, but his consecration. His uncut hair, the visible sign of his Nazirite vow, represented his devotion to God. By surrendering it, he surrendered the last visible mark of his calling. Delilah knew this time it was true. She sent word to the Philistine lords. Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." They came, silver in hand, ready to seize their foe. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep on her lap. His head rested in her lap, a tragic image of misplaced trust. She called for a man to shave the 7 locks of his hair. The razor cut, the locks fell, the vow broken, the symbol gone. Judges 16:19 says, "She began to afflict him, and his strength went from him." Then she cried out, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But the verse adds chilling words. But he didn't know that Yahweh had departed from him. The man who once tore lions, slew armies, and lifted city gates now stood powerless. His strength had left because he had traded his consecration for comfort, his calling for compromise. The locks had fallen. The vow was broken. The spirit had departed. The Philistines seized him, their shouts of triumph filling the room. The mighty man of Israel was about to be led in chains. His eyes would be gouged, his strength gone. Yet even in this darkest hour, God was not finished. Judges chapter 16, verse 21 says, "The Philistines laid hold on him and put out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison." The mighty Samson, once feared across Philistine cities, was now seized like prey. Soldiers swarmed him, ropes binding his arms, their laughter mocking him. Then came the cruelty. They gouged out his eyes. The man who had been led by sight, who saw the woman at Timnah, who saw Delilah and gave in to her, now was left in darkness. His world turned black. The one who once surveyed battlefields now groped like a child. They bound him with bronze shackles, heavy, unyielding, cutting into his wrists and ankles. Once free to roam the hills of Israel, now chained like an ox. Samson, who once lifted city gates onto his shoulders, now stumbled under the weight of iron. Samson, who once swung the jawbone of a donkey with supernatural might, now dragged his chains along prison stones. The Philistines set him to grind grain in the prison. This was the work of slaves, of animals. Pushing the heavy millstone, step after step, hour after hour. The man chosen to deliver Israel now reduced to walking in circles. The one called to fight for freedom, now bound in endless drudgery. The hero now humiliated. Every step was a reminder of his fall. Every push of the stone a reminder of his weakness. News spread quickly. Samson, the terror of the Philistines, was now their captive. Their enemy was blinded, shackled, and humiliated. Their jeers rang out. Songs of mockery were sung in their temples. To them, it was proof their god Dagon was stronger than Yahweh. They gloried in Samson's fall, boasting in their victory. But verse 22 gives a glimmer of hope. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaved. Slowly, quietly, unnoticed by many, the sign of his consecration returned. His strength was gone, but his God was not. Though Samson had fallen, God had not abandoned his purpose. In the prison, in the grinding, in the darkness, God was still at work. Picture Samson in that prison, his eyes gone, his strength gone, his pride shattered. Once a judge of Israel, now a prisoner of its enemies. Yet perhaps for the first time, Samson had space to reflect. He had lived impulsively, chasing desires, flaunting his strength. Now, in the silence of blindness and humiliation, he was being humbled. Sometimes God allows us to be broken so we can finally see what we were blind to before. Samson's fall is sobering. He lost his strength not because the Philistines were stronger, but because he compromised his calling. Yet even here, in his lowest point, God was not done. His hair grew. His story continued. Perhaps you feel bound today by guilt, by regret, by failure. Perhaps you feel blinded, unable to see hope. Samson's story reminds us God's purposes do not end with our failures. His mercy meets us in our prisons. Take a deep breath. Inhale grace. Exhale shame. Whisper, Lord, even in my weakness, you are not finished with me. The Philistines thought the story was over. Samson was blind, chained, and mocked. Their laughter filled their temples. But in the shadows, his hair grew, his faith rekindled, and soon his greatest act of deliverance was yet to come. Judges chapter 16, verse 23 says, "The lords of the Philistines gathered themselves together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, 'Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand.' The temple of Dagon was crowded. The air was thick with incense and pride. Lords, rulers, and common people alike had gathered to celebrate. To them, Samson's fall was proof that Dagon was stronger than Yahweh. Their voices lifted in unison. Our God has delivered into our hand our enemy, the destroyer of our country, who has slain many of us. The temple rang with their laughter, their chants, their drunken praise. Verse 25 continues, "When their hearts were merry, they said, 'Call for Samson, that he may entertain us.' The once mighty judge of Israel was summoned, blind and shackled. Guards dragged him from the prison, his feet shuffling, his hair grown long again, but his eyes gone forever. The crowd roared with laughter. They mocked him. They jeered at his weakness. To them, he was no longer a threat, but a spectacle. They placed him between the pillars of the temple, the very columns that supported the massive roof above. Verse 26 says, "Samson said to the boy who held him by the hand, 'Allow me to feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean on them.' The boy guided him. Samson's hands stretched out, feeling the cold stone, tracing the weight of the structure. He leaned upon them as though for support, but in truth preparing for something far greater." Verse 28 records his prayer. Samson called to Yahweh and said, "Lord Yahweh, remember me, please, and strengthen me, please, only this once, God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." It was a prayer of desperation, a prayer of humility. For the first time in his story, Samson addressed God not in presumption, but in dependence. "Remember me." Once proud, now broken. Once self-reliant, now surrendered. He asked not for glory, but for strength, one last time. Verse 29, Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and leaned on them, one with his right hand and the other with his left. The crowd jeered, unaware of what was about to unfold. The Philistine lords, seated in honor, laughed from their high places. On the roof above, 3,000 men and women watched. Samson braced himself. His muscles tensed. His long hair brushed his shoulders, a reminder that God's consecration had returned. Verse 30. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell on the lords and on all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. The temple groaned, the pillars cracked, the roof shuddered. In a sudden crash, stone and timber gave way. Screams filled the air as dust and rubble consumed the crowd. The mighty temple of Dagon crumbled, a symbol of Philistine pride, now reduced to ruin by the very man they mocked. Samson, buried beneath the stones, died with his enemies. His final act was his greatest act. Verse 31 says, "Then his brothers and all the house of his father came down, and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He judged Israel 20 years, the man who had lived with passion, who had fought with strength, who had fallen in weakness, now rested in his family's tomb." His life was over, but his legacy was etched in the history of Israel. Samson's death was not defeat, it was redemption. He had failed in many ways, yet in his final moments, he turned back to God. His prayer was answered, his strength was restored. His life, though broken, was used by God to strike a crushing blow against Israel's enemies. In his death, he accomplished more than in his life. In his weakness, God's power was revealed. The temple was in ruins. The Philistine lords lay crushed. Samson's story had ended, but his legacy lived on. And now, as we reflect on his life, we see not only the man, but the God who works through broken vessels to accomplish his purposes. Samson's life is a paradox. He was consecrated from the womb, yet drawn to compromise. He was mighty in strength, yet weak in discipline. He was chosen to deliver, yet often distracted by desire. And yet, God used him. Not because he was perfect, but because God is faithful. Not because he never failed, but because God's purposes cannot fail. From the lion to the jawbone, Samson's victories were never his own. Each time, the scripture says, the Spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him. His power was a gift, not a possession. When he forgot this, when he trusted Delilah, when he believed his strength was his own, he fell. So it is with us. Our gifts, our talents, our victories, all are from God. To claim them as ours is to invite weakness. To acknowledge them as his is to walk in true strength. Samson's downfall came not in one moment, but in many compromises. Each time he entertained Delilah's questions, each time he toyed with temptation, he edged closer to ruin. Sin rarely destroys in a single blow. More often, it erodes step by step, whisper by whisper, compromise by compromise. Samson's life warns us. Do not play with temptation. Do not linger where you should flee. Do not assume you can handle what will eventually undo you. Samson ended his life blind, chained, and mocked. Yet in that place of humiliation, he prayed, Lord Yahweh, remember me, please, and strengthen me, please, only this once. And God answered. His greatest victory came not at the height of his strength, but in the depth of his weakness. This is the gospel. God uses broken vessels. He redeems failures. He restores the fallen. Your past does not disqualify you from his purpose. Samson's final act, pulling down the temple, was sacrificial. He gave his life to defeat Israel's enemies. In death, he accomplished what he could not in life. This points us forward to Jesus. Like Samson, Jesus was betrayed by his own people, handed over to Gentiles, mocked and humiliated. Like Samson, he stretched out his arms. Like Samson, his death brought deliverance. But unlike Samson, Jesus rose again, securing eternal victory. Samson's story whispers of Christ's story, the true deliverer, the greater judge, the perfect savior. Through Samson's life, we see that God's purposes move forward even when his people falter. Israel was delivered not because Samson was flawless, but because God is faithful. Your mistakes cannot cancel his mission. Your weakness cannot overturn his will. His grace is greater than your failure. Samson's life calls us to humility, to vigilance, to dependence, to trust. He reminds us that calling is sacred, that compromise is dangerous, that grace is greater than failure, and that strength is found not in ourselves, but in God. When you feel strong, remember Samson and remain humble. When you feel tempted, remember Samson and remain steadfast. When you feel broken, remember Samson and cry, Lord, remember me. Beloved, as you rest tonight, remember, your strength comes not from yourself, but from God. Your failures are not the end, for His grace redeems. Your calling is sacred. Guard it, honor it, live it. And when storms rise, when temptations press, when weakness weighs heavy, know this. The same God who heard Samson's final prayer hears you. Sleep in peace. Rest in His mercy. Trust in His strength. Amen.